Today on Mechanics Corner, Eli is going to be teaching you about how to remove a transmission from a Dodge truck. Enjoy. Remember kids, we're going to be safe during this video, so always wear your protection. Welcome to Eli's School of Useless Stuff that you probably never use, but you're going to watch anyway. Alright, today we have a 2004 Dodge Ram 2500 with a 5.7 Hemi V8 Magnum engine, 5-speed manual transmission, has a rear main oil seal gone bad in it, and that's what we're going to be learning how to replace today. So, to get to our first step. Here we are inside the vehicle, and the first step is to remove the center console, which is all of this that you currently see. And to some of you it won't make sense, we're working on the engine, why are we inside the truck? Well, get to the rear of the engine, we have to take the transmission out. Take the transmission out, we got to take the top of the transmission off through the cab. Here's a better look at the console we're going to be removing. This truck had previously been worked on, had the transmission removed, so it ought to be pretty simple. Most of the screws probably weren't put back in for easy convenience for next time. So, stock, it should have a screw right here, a screw in this cubby, and a screw under this boot. Let's go ahead and take this apart and see if we can get to them screws. Alrighty, it appears that they have only replaced one screw, which is in this hole right here. Now to remove this screw, we'll be using this 5/16 deep well, 1/4-inch drive with a extension and a ratchet. And there's our screw. It's just a simple self-tapping sheet metal screw with a 5/16 head. Now let's see if we can remove this here console. We will first have to remove the gear shift knob. The gear shift knob simply unscrews from these threads right here. Now let's see if this here will pull off for us. The console slipped off pretty easy. You just lifted up on the front end and pulled out and made sure the boot came off of the gear shifter. Now to get down to the rest of the transmission, we have to pry back these flaps and get to those bolts right there at the 5/16 head. There should be 1, 2, 3, about 5 or 6 of them. Take off this boot here. There is in fact 6 of these screws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then one right back there, 6. And I'll be using my 5/16 socket and ratchet again to remove these. I know this is probably common sense, but for some of you who may not understand, these screws here in the back and some of these on this side, it'll be a lot easier to get to taking the extension off of your ratchet. Now we have gotten all 6 of our bolts out. Now we need to pry up on this boot to separate it from the floor right here, and for that we can just use a simple flathead screwdriver, just like that, and it pulls up, and then you can slide it up off there. Sometimes it's a little tricky, gotta maneuver it around some other pieces. But in the end it pops off. Now that we have gotten this boot off, now we need to take this top shifter off, which there are 4 bolts right here which appear to be 10mm. These bolts here are in fact 10mm, so I just got my 1/4-inch drive ratchet with a 10mm deep well socket, and there are these 4 bolts around the outside which need to come off, and the whole shifter will come out. Before you remove these 4 bolts, I suggest putting the transmission into gear position number 5 and 5th gear, just because it'll make it simpler down the road trying to put the transmission back into the vehicle. Now that we got all 4 bolts out, we can take the shifter assembly out And there is a plate right here with a hole in it we need to also remove. There is our shifting forks and all that stuff. Now obviously if you have a automatic truck, or if it's a different brand, you're going to have different ways of taking your transmission out. But for this 2004 Dodge with a 5-speed manual, we have to take the shifter assembly out. Now we're as far as we need to get inside the cab. Let's get this truck up onto the rack, and then we can take a look underneath to see what we need to take out. Now this truck has a large radio antenna on top, which will hit the ceiling when we raise the truck up, so it's just magnet mount, so I'm gonna take that down so we do not damage the antenna. You must be very careful when trying to put your vehicle up on a rack, especially when you're by yourself, because if the truck falls, that could be very dangerous. So once you have the truck lifted up so much, I like to do something called the wobble test. If I can push on and shake it and it ain't falling, I know it's good. I'm not too sure how well this will come up on camera, but we're under the truck right now, and as you can see, all of that oil right there, all of this is soaked in oil. It's all coming from right there, that main seal. This here's the bell housing, this is the engine. It's all coming out of here. That's that main oil seal. There's your transmission right there. Alright, now, first step is to take the rear drive shaft off, which is this piece right here. This piece. And the way you do that is there are 4 bolts. 1, 2, and then there is 3 and 4. And that is where the drive shaft meets the rear differential. Here's the back tires to put that into perspective for you. Now, for these, I believe it's a 18 millimeter. We're going to use an impact socket. We're also going to use a impact gun with the impact socket, just to be clear. So here we got our cordless 3/8 drive impact with the 15 millimeter wobble socket on there. We're going to now remove the 4 bolts on the rear drive shaft. Now that we got the 4 bolts out, we should just be able to pop it out of place and get it unseated from the rear differential. Alrighty, well the drive shaft doesn't seem to want to come out on its own, so grab yourself a little pry bar and start prying on it, try to get her pull out. That's what I'm going to do. I got the drive shaft to come off, but it needs some help from a BFH 5 to be exact, made by Matco Tools. Now, this drive shaft up here on the transfer case end will just slide out as I am currently showing you. And now we can just set this on the ground or side or wherever you want to put it. Alrighty, since this is a 4-wheel drive model, there's also a front drive shaft that needs to be removed from the transfer case. And to do that, we got the 4 bolts up here towards the rear of the truck, which is on the transfer case. They're 16 millimeter. I suggest using a 16 millimeter wobble socket extension and your good old impact. Take those off. Alrighty, now if the 4 bolts are out, I suggest getting your crowbar and your BFH out, or just regular hammer, whatever you got, and breaking this loose off of here. Ow, son of a biscuit.
As much oil that's on here coming from that engine, you'd think it'd be easy to get off there.
There we go, I got her to break loose after just a couple hits. Now we can push that out of our way and get on to the next step. After removing this front drive shaft, I have now noticed that this U-joint here is real loose and it's going to need replaced sometime. You see all that wiggle? You don't want to do that. But that's a job for another day. This right here is called charcoal canisters. It's right in front of the fuel tank. It's another sort of filter. And to properly get the transmission out of the way so we can replace the seal in the engine, we have to remove this. It has 4 bolts up here against the frame, 2 on each side. 13 millimeter. I suggest using just a socket and a ratchet and figuring out the easiest way for you to do it. You can do it with a gear wrench or whatever you want, but I'm gonna use a socket. Before you fully take off your charcoal canisters, you're gonna have to remove 2 things. There's a bolt that goes from your fuel filter here into this steel, and then it slides up and out of its place. And then, this had already been previously removed and not installed back for some reason. And this one probably also had a bolt in it at one point, but it also slides right up off its peg. And this is a fuel pump. This is a filter. You're going to want to remove both of them before you completely remove this. And also, there is a hose on top. I don't know if you can see it very well or not. It's one of these hoses back here. Will slide off when you pull the canisters themselves off, which you have to, when you go to put it back on, you gotta make sure them line up. It's just kind of a pain. Now that we have this canister off and I'm holding it, there's still a hose and a wire that is connected into the rest of the fuel system, and for those we're going to have to remove. Here we're just going to simply pop the hose off at the fuel filter, and here's this clip. That red piece you slide over to the left, and then you squeeze the tab at the top and it should slide right off. Now we've completely removed the charcoal packs and the from the fuel filter and from this and from where they're mounted on to the frame. Now we have plenty of extra room. We got like 2 foot here to slide the transfer case back so we can get to the seal where we need to do. Now to our next step, which is to remove this here cross member. Let me find the wrenches I need to take out these 4 bolts. There's, the bolts here on this side, and then on the other side are the nuts, and I'm going to be using an impact on those also. Alright, here we got our 3/8 drive cordless impact with a 18mm socket on it. Woo, 18mm, yeah! And then we got our 21mm wrench. The wrench is for the nut side, and this is for the bolt head side. Now, when you do this, you're going to want to loosen them almost all the way. You can actually take the nut off, but you want to keep the bolt inside the cross member to hold it up, because if it drops, all hell is going to break loose, I tell you what. Alright, here we go. Let's take these off. That one came off easy. There we go. There's the other nut. These probably just coming off because they're very well oiled. Usually you're going to have to let the impact go to town on it for a little bit. Let's take this side off. See, that one was a little bit tighter. Alright, here's the nut. Set it right there on our beam. Let's take the next one off. Now look, we don't want that to come out of there, so we're going to hit it back in. Yep, there goes our socket. We want to keep them bolts in there because all hell will break loose if this cross member falls down and drops our transmission and bends stuff, and don't want that to happen. Now that we got the nuts off of this side and the bolts are still in there holding it up, now we have to get our screw jack, which is conveniently right over there, and we're gonna have to jack up this end of the transfer case, keep it up in the air, and we got 2 bolts in here holding this cross member to the transmission. So we got to take them out, and it looks like it's going to take a 15mm wrench. I could be wrong. I'll let y'all know what it is when I find that out after I get the screw jack in. Alrighty, now we got our screw jack in place and it is goodly secured up here, and we cranked it up a little bit so it's picking up this whole transfer case and transmission, so we can get our ratchet or wrench or whatever we want in here with more ease to get these bolts out. Alrighty, these bolts here do in fact have 15mm heads on them, so I'm going to use this 15mm gear wrench, which is pretty much a ratchet inside of a wrench, which is pretty cool. You can use a socket probably, or just a regular wrench if you don't have these fancy tools here. but that's alright, it'll just take a little bit longer. I'm going to take these out now. Alright, this is what it looks like now that we got them 2 bolts out. Now, we're going to take out this cross member here, and with them 4 bolts that we loosened up earlier. And the way I'm going to take these out is I'm going to use my impact again and just screw them out. Let's see how this works. Now you want to keep all your bodily parts out of the way while you are taking this out, because there's a good chance it could fall on you. It's probably going to be rusted in, like this one appears to be. It's kind of stuck in there. So yes, if this were to fall out, it would hurt it. It weighs a good amount. But to get this out, I'm going to use a pry bar and the good old BFH5. Alright, now that we got the cross member out, now we have a lot easier access to the transmission. Now we have a bunch of hoses and wires we need to unhook from this transmission before it can be taken out, because we don't want to rip any of the wires. Like, we got wires up here that need to come loose. We got wires over here. We got this linkage up here. Everything needs to be taken out. Alrighty, let's get to taking them out. Alrighty, we got a lot of things we need to remove. Starting off, well, you can do this in any order. We have the slave cylinder right here, which requires removing 2 13mm nuts off of these studs. Sometimes when you pull it off, the stud will come with it, and that's alright. You just tighten it back down when you're done. We have this linkage for the four-wheel drive, which if you do not have a four-wheel drive model, you won't have to worry about this linkage. This just pops out here. This section pulls out of that rubber boot. We have this vent hose up here, which will need to be pulled off probably with pliers. We have this wire up here. It goes up top. It's just a simple clip type. You're going to pull off, and there's another wire up top here somewhere that we need to remove. Let's get to doing it. Alright, to safely remove the four-wheel drive shifter connector, I'm going to use this special pry bar to pop it off. You can just use a screwdriver if that's all you have, but you also risk damaging it. You just stick it in here and pop it out. Like so. Alright, now that's taken off. We have to remove this wire up here. I'm going to set my pry bar down. You just lift up on that little clip right here, and it should pull right out. Right like that. This little hose, it looks like somebody didn't put it on right last time, so it should just slide off. Looky there, hose is off. Alright, now we have this plug up here, which is really hard to see from the ground, because all you would see is this, but it's up behind this cluster of hoses and cables. Up on top of the transmission, it's the same type as the one in the back. You just lift up on the tab and pull it off, and there you go. Now we have only the slave cylinder pull off, which like I said is 13mm. You're going to need a deep well socket or a wrench to get to this. I'm going to personally use the 13mm deep well socket with the impact. Alright, here we go. Let's get these taken off here. Okay, there's that nut. Gonna set that to the side. Now we have this top one, which will be a little bit harder to get to with an impact, but we ought to get to it just fine. And looks like the stud came with it, which is alright. We'll just have to put it back in. Now this slave cylinder is loose, and we can just pull it out of its little hole like this, and it'll lay it off to the side. Now we can get to putting the transmission jack in. Let's go to that. Alright, here we are, and I already got the jack up to the transmission. I got it ratchet strapped down to the transmission, and it's jacked up a little bit enough to get the screw jack out of the way. And in case you don't know how to put one of these jacks in, ask your local redneck, because I'm not going to explain it in this video. Once we got our transmission safely secured, at least we hope safely, we don't want to drop something. Now we can take out the 4 transmission bolts that connected to the bell housing. One here, one up there, and 2 on the other side. You're going to need your 19mm socket and your impact for this. Okay, now that we got all 4 transmission bolts out, it's time to separate this from the bell housing. And to start out, you're probably going to want to use a small crowbar, like this one. And you just want to stick it down in there and try to pry it apart a little bit. Push on the jack, try to help separate it. You might have to lift it up or down depending on how it works, and just try to separate it without breaking anything. Now that you got it separated, you're going to want to do another second check to make sure all your wires are out of the way. You don't want anything left hooked up, and as you can see, all my wires are out of the way, tubes are unhooked, and we can slide this out the rest of the way. You're going to have to raise and lower it depending on how your exhaust system is set up to get it back far enough. Just get back as far as you can. Alright, now I hope you understand why we took them charcoal canisters out, because as you can see, the transfer case is now against the front of the fuel tank. Now that your transmission is a safe distance away from your bell housing, there are some bolts along the outside of the bell housing you have to take off, which require various different size sockets, and you also have to take this starter off here on this side. So go ahead and take your bell housing off and don't drop it, because if you break it, that's your own fault and I'm not liable. Alrighty, now I've taken the bell housing off along with the starter, and to do all that I need a 15mm, a 16mm, and a 10mm socket with the impact. And as you can see, here's the clutch and the flywheel, and it's just coated in oil, and that's really not good, and that means that seal back there is leaking a whole heck of a lot. So to get down to that seal, we both have to take the clutch off, and the flywheel. To take the clutch off, there are 6 bolts that go from the clutch into the flywheel that are 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that off, and if you're doing this, do not drop this. You don't want to break anything on your clutch. That'll be real bad. There's also a clutch pad in there on the inside which will fall. So if you have a clutch alignment tool, I suggest sticking it in there, and it holds everything together. You don't have to, but you can. And just take out these 6 bolts and pull it off. Alrighty, now that we took them 6 bolts out that was holding the clutch on, now we have an exposed flywheel. And there's the clutch right here, the 2 pieces. You got the clutch pad and the rest of the clutch. Don't mind the bandages, had a little incident earlier. Now we just gotta take out these 8 bolts up here, and then the flywheel will come off, and this flywheel is about 60-65 pounds, so when you do this you want to make sure you have a good hold of it, or you have somebody else holding it when you take these out. Alrighty, let's take them out. To take these 8 bolts out here, we're going to use our 17mm socket with the impact, and we're just going to take them out in a circular fashion and leave the one at the top loose, but still in there to hold it enough to where the flywheel ain't gonna fall off on us. Alrighty, this is what the engine looks like without the flywheel on it, and as you can see, all this oil around here, this is our culprit, this oil seal here. So it looks like it's leaking everywhere. Broken bolt, that might have something to do with it right there. That bolt's gonna have to be replaced. We got a new oil seal ordered, and we have it in actually. So I guess I'm going to remove these bolts, whatever are left of them, and also this pan right here needs to be removed with these 4 bolts, 2 on each side, so I can get the bolts that go from the oil pan into the bottom of this seal plate, because the new seal we got came with a new seal plate. So let's go ahead and get started on taking this off. Get the 4 bolts out on the bottom of the pan, which we might as well do first. We're going to need to use a 15mm socket and the impact. Alright, now we got that pan taken off, which is pretty simple, just taking out them 4 bolts. Now we have to take out these 4 bolts that run along the edge of the oil pan, which are 10mm. Take out them 4, so we can also take out these bolts around here and get this seal pulled off. Alright, we got them 4 bolts out of the bottom. Now we have to get these 4 bolts out around the seal plate itself, which are going to have 5/16 heads. They're supposed to be 5, but one's broke off up here, obviously, so we're going to have to find a way to drill that one out or something after we get this plate off. But these 4 are 5/16, so let's go ahead and pull that off there. Now that all the bolts out holding this seal plate in, we're going to be very, very careful and use a small crowbar or a screwdriver
or something to try to pry this out of place.
Alright, we got this seal plate out.
And this is what it looks like up in here without that seal plate. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a rag and some brake parts cleaner and clean up all around this, just so we can get a better look at what's going on up here. Alrighty, now I've cleaned up around where this plate was, and we got a better look at this broken bolt, and it's sticking out enough. I think I can get a pair of vice grips on here and try to turn it out like that, and we'll see what all we can do with that.
Already I was able to unscrew the bolt with this small pair of vice grips.
Alrighty, after removing this bolt with a pair of vice grips, I've noticed something which is the cause of our problem. There is no spacer in this hole. Yet in this hole, there is a spacer. And on the plate we removed, both spacers are inside of that plate. So that means that this seal has been removed before, and that spacer right there not pulled out from the original piece. So we weren't able to get a good seal along this edge, and that's where all this oil has come from. Now I'm going to try to pull out this piece right here, and we can see what's going to happen after that.
Alrighty, I got the bushing here out of the engine block. It wasn't too hard, just used a hook and reached in there and popped her out with a little bit of prying. And
so that's what's left. It's just the regular hole, just like this side. So now both sleeves on our new plate will fit in there and it'll seal up good. But just in case, I'm going to run some gasket maker around, especially here on this bottom. I'm going to run some gasket maker where this other gasket is, just to be safe. I might run some up and around here just to seal it up pretty good, and we'll see what happens after that. Alrighty, since I got that small bushing removed earlier, I went ahead and put the new seal plate in. I didn't record any of that because I had to concentrate on putting it all back in and getting all the bolts lined up and running gasket maker around it just to help it seal and torquing the bolts down. I had to put a new bolt in where the old one had broken. I just grabbed the bolt out of the bolt bin that fit. It was a little long, so I had to grind it down so it would fit good, and this should stop it from leaking. So this will be the end of the video. Make sure to watch part 2, putting the transmission back together, when it comes out shortly after this video is posted. And have fun breaking stuff. Thank you for watching today's episode of Mechanics Corner. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, comment in the comment section down below any ideas for us for our next video. Y'all have a good day.